Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome everybody to the announcements for the 2023 forms changes. Thank you for joining us here in the room and online. I'm Stephen Lamar, the 2023 committee chair for the forms chair. I'm here with Addison Russell, our counsel. We're also joined by our off-camera by our other legal counsel here on the forms committee. Let me start off by saying we had a great year on forms committee. Not too many changes to go through, so hopefully we'll have a short meeting and there will be a Q&A that you can use at the bottom of your screen. If you'll type any questions you have, we'll try to get to those for you. Again, thank you to everyone who served on the committee, everyone who wrote in and had comments and questions for us about the forms. And if you have more, keep them coming, and please consider serving on the 2024 Forms Committee. So.
And before we get into the forms changes, the packet is available on Tennessee Realtors website under Forms on the Fly. So if you want to pull it up and you follow along, we'll try and show them here on the screen as we go through them, but you can have them in front of you. And then also following the webinar, please go and print those out and review them and let us know what you think. As Stephen mentioned, there is a Q&A box to put any questions you have. Please limit the questions to the forms changes from this year. If you have any questions about the forms outside of those changes, feel free to send those to the hotline and we'll get those answered for you. All right, Stephen, are you ready to,
yes,
get
thank
into
you.
the good stuff?
All right, gonna roll on in here. 16 different changes for us to go through here on 16 forms, it looks like. Let's get
Scroll down, because right now you'll see that he's scrolling through all of those listing agreements where that change is made.
Hot land, co-listing, 151. Here we are.
All right.
This is the mutual release.
Yeah, and so this, if you'll go down to line 24, this I hope is going to be a very beneficial change to, especially to any buyer agents out there that are released from their agency agreements. Previously, you'll see that the form read that the carryover paragraph doesn't apply if the property is listed with another licensee. Certainly, the intention of the form is if the consumer has entered into a new representation agreement with another licensee, then that carryover clause doesn't apply. That's language taken from the buyer rep agreement and the listing agreement. So we just want to make that clear here in this form that it does apply both ways, not only to if the property is listed, but if that client has found another buyer agent.
So it still applies to both buyers
Yes.
and sellers now?
Yes. And we have a hand raised. And was it Bobby? Yes. Miss Bobby, do you have a question?
Yes, when you were scrolling really fast,
Yeah.
I saw there was a change on FERPA in the listing, and I saw a red flash by it, and I just didn't know if there was something in there, or was that just housekeeping?
I think it's housekeeping. And so to kind of hit on the housekeeping, I'll tell you what we did so we don't go through it. And any wills were kind of changed to shalls, which is the more legalese term. And then also we try to remove pronouns rather than referencing he or she. We try to use proper nouns. So seller will be referred to as seller, buyer will be referred to as buyer, tenant, landlord, etc. And that way it's easier to follow rather than who is this he, who is this she, so we know kind of where it is.
Thank you.
Yeah. But there were no substantive changes to the FERPTA, to answer your question there.
All right, so we went over the 151. Now we have the 304, our disclaimer notice. Small change there, just removing line 113.
And the reason for that is, as some of you that have followed forms changes through the years, disclaimer notices and wire fraud warnings used to kind of have the signature of both clients, the buyer and the seller. The committee a few years ago changed that to where they are unilateral notification notices. So now this is just a disclaimer notice that an agent is making to their client or their customer, and it only needs to be signed by that client or customer. So they're not acknowledging receipt of anything; they're just signing it in making the disclosure there.
All right. And now what some would consider the most important form, the 401, purchase and sale agreement. Wills and shalls, there on the first page.
Yeah.
By request, we have removed THDA from one of the loan types. THDA financing is usually in combination with another type of financing, FHA, VA, conventional. I'm not sure if they go with USDA or not. It'd be a good question for them. But the THDA alone, we had the request from THDA to please remove that.
Mm-hmm. And as Stephen said, just because that doesn't really per THDA, that doesn't really accurately describe the products they have available to buyers. So certainly if you have something unique, you can always use that other checkbox to make the sellers aware of what kind of financing the buyer is using. The next change here is on line 101, and this is just for clarification that if you don't have an appraisal contingency in the agreement, then you cannot use failure to appraise as a basis for loan denial and exercise your financing contingency. I think that was certainly unspoken, but want to make it clear that there's no way around that.
In prorations, we have an addition here. If the final tax rate for the current year has not been set by the taxing authority at the time of closing, the tax rate and property assessment for the immediately preceding calendar year shall be utilized for calculation of the tax proration.
And again, that's just addressing kind of a gap that was in the agreement that didn't speak to that situation, but now buyers and sellers will know how that's to be handled. Then we'll go down to 289.
In initial inspections.
And so here we're in the inspection section of the agreement.
Loans and the requirements under those. So there are some changes that you'll see here under the wood destroying insect inspection report that will also be reflected on the 625, the VA FHA addendum as well.
Yeah, and we got a lot of input about this from our members across the state that were saying, hey, now VA is saying that a termite inspection is no longer a non-allowable expense for the buyer. So to kind of address that change in the VA guidelines, we've gone through our forms to make it a little more consistent with how that works. And like Stephen said, we'll talk about another change later on when we do get to like the VA addendum form.
All right, now the buyer's inspection and resolution. We've made some changes under the resolution period.
there's still a little bit of formatting we're going to do here, but the words are there and correct.
Yeah, I think it's over there. So last year, again, the committee made the change to make it clear that a buyer could accept the property as is throughout the inspection period. Because, you know, in the market that we were living in, buyers would say, no, I'll take it as is. And the seller would say, well, that's not how this is going to work. And so accept it as is. And with the previous wording, it read that the parties had to reach a mutual agreement. So now we've just made it clear that this is how a buyer can accept the property as is during that resolution period without any repairs. And so they can do that via the notification form or written notice, just like they would in other circumstances. And then when they withdraw their repair or replacement proposal by using the notification form, the buyer is deemed to have accepted the property as is. I think Bobby has her hand raised again, so we'll stop here and see what you have to say. Bobby.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Can you give an example of this? I think I understand it. I just want to make sure what you're saying here in real world.
Okay.
So, you're in the resolution period, and you're going back and forth. At some point, if they can't reach a mutual agreement by the end date or the end time, the contract automatically terminates as it was, okay?
Correct.
That's how it still is. But during the resolution period, if they're going back and forth and the buyer, for some reason, even if the seller agrees to what they're doing, like they have an agreement, but they haven't signed it, the seller said yes, they get to the end of the resolution period or even before, the buyer can say, I don't care if you are gonna do what I asked, I'm out.
No, it's not. It doesn't give them the opportunity to get out. It gives them the opportunity to say, I will accept, this section speaks to, I will accept the property as is. And so in a real life situation, if Steve and I are in a contract to purchase a house, I'm the buyer, I've submitted my repair request, and we're going back and forth, and then maybe Steven's like, you know what, I don't think, like, he's given me one repair out of the 17 that I submitted, and we're just kind of we're not really getting anywhere. Then at that point I can say, it doesn't matter, I love the house so much, I'm going to accept it as is. Here's my notification form that I'm withdrawing my repair proposal, and I'll accept the property as is, and then we just move on throughout the contract. So that's what this is for.
At any
And
time.
that has to be done prior to the expiration of the resolution.
Yes,
period.
ma'am.
Correct.
At any time between the binding agreement date and the expiration of the resolution period, the buyer may choose to accept the property as is.
Okay, so that's great, but no withdrawal. They can't withdraw prior.
They can only unilaterally terminate under the inspection period. Once they've submitted
So
a
they
list
would
of
have-
required repairs, then they've entered the resolution period.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's just giving the mechanism to accept the property as is and explaining exactly how that works with what forms.
Right, okay.
Okay, and then, so we'll go back to looking at the language on the form, and like Steven said, there are some formatting issues we've discovered here in the 1, 2, 3s, but ignore that for now, and let's talk in theory that if we've laid out 3 scenarios for the end of the resolution period, and if the seller and buyer don't reach a mutual written resolution, which has always been there, or the buyer doesn't provide notice to seller that the buyer is accepting the property as is, and if you want to scroll down on your computer a little bit, or they don't mutually agree to extend the resolution period, then the agreement is terminated, and at that point the buyer is entitled to a refund of the earnest money, trust money.
We're going to format that better. The in the event will be moved ahead of the 1, and this agreement is hereby terminated will be moved down so that you can see it applies to any of these 3 possible outcomes under the resolution period that would result in termination.
Bobby, do you have a question again?
I'm sorry.
I keep asking questions. This is great.
Well, because I'm gonna have to teach this, and I wanna make sure I say the right thing. So what I'm saying, hearing that no time during the resolution period can a buyer withdraw and terminate. They can only terminate during the inspection period, at the end of that or prior. They cannot terminate during a resolution period unless it goes to expire and then it automatically terminates, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So none of that fundamental stuff changed.
Right, I just want to make sure that people understand that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
got it. Thank you.
All right. I think we're going now to line 448, moving off inspection and resolution. And this is just a housekeeping thing, but it's important.
'Cause I know y'all love reading the U.S. Code
That's right.
5, Section 6103, subsection A.
Yeah, so just to give you a little background, federal holidays are statutorily defined, and this is the code where you can find that. Subsection A defines those federal holidays, and so I don't have the full exhaustive list, but, 4th of July, Juneteenth, Thanksgiving, Christmas, those good stuff. Well, subsection B of 6103B talks about recognition of federal holidays as it applies to federal employees. And so this kind of arose that, for instance, I believe this year, Juneteenth was actually on a Sunday, but banks and other federal employees may have recognized it on Monday. Well,
The observed day.
the
Yeah.
observed day, that's a proper term. Well, the observance day doesn't mean anything under our contract, so to you. So if you have any deadline that fell on Monday, June 20th, it was still Monday, June 20th, and you were still required to perform. So I know that people aren't reading the subsections, but in the event that you have to go to a courtroom and defend it, we wanted it to be very clear and very narrow as to what days we were talking about. And so I think that we had another raised hand, and it may have been about the resolution period. Janet, do you have a question? Oh, we have 2 raised hands. Oh,
Okay.
Janet, we can't hear you. I'm
If
sorry.
you want to type it in, we're still gonna go over anything that you type into the Q&A as well.
For sure. Is there another person that has their hand raised? Okay. Neil, do you have a question?
Are you there?
Yeah.
We
we're
are.
here.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. No, I needed some more clarification on the resolution period.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So if, after the inspection and you're in the resolution period, if the two parties, buyer and seller, cannot come to a mutual agreement, then is the contract null and void at the end of the resolution period?
Yes, it's terminated.
Okay, so the
Well-
buyer can just wait to the end of the resolution period for it to be terminated?
Well, they have to act in good faith. That's
Right,
a word
right.
we use. And then I just to elaborate, this wasn't your question, but yes, if they don't reach a mutual agreement, or if the buyer doesn't accept the property as is, or if they don't extend the resolution period, then it's terminated. But so the parties are contractually obligated to operate in good faith. So the buyer
Sure.
can't just sit there and wait for the period to end and not send over anything or not operate in
Right.
good faith. But if it does end and there's one of those 3 things haven't happened, then the agreement's terminated.
Okay, so not a whole lot has changed there.
Correct.
No, we've really tried to spell it out. A lot of these additions are spelling out a lot of times we thought we understood that and that everyone understood it the same way, and they didn't. So we're trying to very, very well spell it out so everybody can read the same words.
Okay, and so we do have, are you done, Neil? I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yes, I'm done,
Okay.
thank you.
And then we do have some questions in the question and answer things. I feel like maybe Stephen and I didn't do a good job of explaining this. So we're going to go back to the inspection and resolution period and just going to slow down and go over it. And the question is, you're saying a buyer cannot terminate the contract during the resolution period. That's correct. So once you go through the inspection period, and a buyer can, after they've conducted their inspection, either terminate based on the results of the inspection,
Yep.
submit a
That's number
list
one.
of repairs. That's number 3. I jumped. Okay, so they can terminate, or they can
terminate unilaterally
Yeah.
under the inspection period, having conducted the inspection. They can accept as is.
Correct. Or they can submit a list of items which they'd like to be repaired.
Mhm.
And once they do that, if they submit items to be repaired, they enter into the resolution period. When you're in the resolution period, and this hasn't changed, the parties agree to operate in good faith during that period. You cannot terminate unilaterally. But the buyer does now have the option during the resolution period to accept the property as is. So I hope that kind of walking back through that a little slower maybe shed some clarity.
In other words, they can roll back to the second option and accept the property as is. I think there was an understanding before that, oh, too late, you submitted a list of repairs, so accepting it as is no longer an option. And my negotiating with you in good faith as a seller is to tell you I'm not going to do anything because I've got a higher cash offer now that's waiting in the wings as a backup that I'd like to go to.
But just to clarify, the inspection period and the options following the inspection period were not changed, were not touched. They still operate. And even the options in the resolution period were not changed in 2022. We just tried to spell it out a little better as to how a buyer could accept that property as is during the resolution period. So I think that wholly answers all those questions submitted. I think Bobby had her hand raised again. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just one more clarification.
Yeah.
So you're in the resolution period, you've submitted, seller agrees to what you've submitted, you cannot then terminate. You have to go. So in other words, even when in the resolution, if you come to an agreement, even if it's not put on the addendum yet, the buyer cannot just say, I've changed my mind, I don't care if you're gonna fix anything. That's what I want to be clear on.
Correct.
They don't get to get out once they enter into, if the seller agrees. If the seller agrees to fix everything, then the buyer cannot walk during the resolution.
That would
Correct.
not be operating in good faith.
And
Okay.
and you
I
can't.
just wanted, I mean, I always knew that was the case. I just wanted to make sure that that's still clarifying.
Yeah, we just try to make it clear as to how the buyer can accept the property as is, should they choose. Okay, before we move on, while Stephen has it pulled up on the screen, are there any more questions on this? Because I know that this is really where a lot of y'all live in the forums, and certainly the thing that gets the most questions. Looks like there's another question in the Q&A, so we'll see what that is. Can the buyer not walk away? Can the buyer not walk away if the amendment has not been signed by all parties? So I think that we're getting a little into like fact-specific things, and it does say if the parties don't reach a mutual written resolution, which would be a signed amendment. But in Bobby's scenario where the seller agreed to all of the buyer's requests and then the buyer did not sign the amendment, I think that you can get them on good faith in that scenario.
The parties agree to negotiate repairs in good faith during the resolution period.
And then we have another question. Speaking of good faith, it's like, can we get a definition of good faith? No.
No, there's been resistance to that. That's been
Yeah.
asked before.
I think that that's certainly, it's not uncommon to see that in a contract, and it will be very fact specific if you have to go to a mediation or arbitration or in a courtroom, and a judge will make that reasonable determination as to what was good faith, and it's, outside factors certainly apply. You know, if the buyer had another house or another contract on another house, that's not going to play well into their good faith argument. So I think that there are a lot of factors that go into determining good faith that we certainly could not begin to enumerate here, but you're all very reasonable people, I hope so. So you can probably identify what is not good and bad faith. And I think specifically, he goes on to say, if the buyer requests repairs and the seller says no, which is good faith under my definition of good faith, it is, the buyer would have to wait until the end of the resolution period to withdraw, correct? Yes, that's correct, unless the parties just agreed to terminate the contract via an amendment at that time. I mean, they can mutually agree to that, like, we're not gonna get anywhere, let's not
They can
waste
go ahead and
time.
sign a mutual release of 481 and amicably part ways.
Correct. And then once the seller agrees to make repairs, the resolution period is over, correct? Once you get a signed amendment, the resolution
Looking for
period.
a signed 655 repair or replacement amendment.
All right.
So much fun. All right, shall we continue?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay.
We were in the 440s. We had talked about back on market and extend the expiration date. You already have expiration date extended as your option on line 9, so it's a little redundant. I think that was why it was removed.
Yeah, and placing property back on the market really wasn't a term that kind of matched the business practices as to how this works. So just move that again, because we do have expiration date extended to already.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're on the VA FHA loan addendum, go down line 32. And this is what we were talking about earlier with the VA changing their guidelines about term out inspections being a non-allowable buyer's expense. So we did just remove that section on the VA addendum.
Cap on that still.
And the change to expenses really just lines up better with the 401, where we call those buyer expenses and seller expenses. And closing costs is not a term that we use throughout the contracts. And I think the next change, if you want to scroll down, is right there, just making it clear that the licensee representing the parties can sign this form. It doesn't have to be the principal broker or the managing broker. Broker is kind of an all-encompassing term. Could be affiliate broker or principal broker. Mm-hmm. But we just want to make clear that it can just be the agent. And we have some more hands raised. So it was Bobby first. Bobby?
So, back to the VA, is it still saying in the 401 that if the buyer can change during the time period from a conventional to a FHA loan, does it still state that in that event, they can do so, but the seller, as long as it doesn't cost the seller anymore?
That's correct.
Correct?
Yes.
So they get into a pickle there a little bit if they do change, and there's non-allowables if the seller doesn't want to pay them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why if you have a buyer utilizing those type of financing options, to go ahead and disclose that on the front end. I mean, I know things change,
So can we
rates change.
check 2 boxes on loans?
Sure.
Like FHA and conventional on the
let me
financing option, so that you're covered should you want to choose? We moved that from boxes to box, and I thought we weren't allowed to add 2, which we used to be able to put in case they wanted to have the option to choose either conventional or FHA. Then the seller automatically accepted their option to choose, and so that would eliminate the seller fighting the non-allowables, in my opinion. But now, if you only check conventional and you change during the course to FHA, the seller can refuse to accept and not allow.
Mhm. So it does say select the appropriate box. And it also says what you had stated earlier, which they may apply for a different loan that doesn't change the seller's bottom line. If it does, then they would need the seller's agreement to amend that, because again, it's changing the terms of the agreement.
Okay, I just,
But
wanted-
you were asking about checking two boxes. I know that
Well, we used to
eliminating
be
the
able-
THDA was
we-
part of that.
we used to be able to do that so that it was stated up front that the seller was aware that there might be the opportunity.
We
So-
might go conventional, we might go VA, we're not sure yet, so we're just gonna check them both.
Right. We're not allowed to do that now?
I don't see that as being, you could. I would
Okay.
state it in special stipulations if I had a client that.
I
we
think
had
that
to do
that's what I was gonna suggest, is maybe in that other box, elaborate
Okay.
a little bit.
Okay.
And because I feel like by checking, I mean, you could check all of them, I guess, but then the seller doesn't really know what that leads to. But if you have a buyer that's between two, and they're kind of like looking at their options, but they may be eligible for a VA loan, but they're also gonna explore the conventional loan route. I would just elaborate under other there, just to give the full
Okay.
picture. And I think that's what's most
appreciate it.
important.
I was just concerned about the non-allowable situation, so I appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Our pleasure. All right. Anything else on our 625?
And I will say, we have a comment that says, please speak up a bit. I don't know
Oh,
if that's to
okay.
me or you, but we'll
We
try.
got the mics here. Hopefully you can hear us.
Pull them closer. Okay, where are we? Yes, so we are on the VA addendum, and I think we talked about the broker to licensee change. That's really just questions. Is someone, we have another question coming in. Oh. Sorry, I'm reading the question. Okay. And I think we're getting a little in the questions outside of the forms changes. So if you could kind of keep the questions to just what was changed this year. And like I said, if you have any other questions, send those to the hotline. And so the question that came in was about the checkboxes on loan types, but we'll try and keep just to the changes today for purposes of this webinar. But send them to the hotline and we'll get back to you. Okay.
So the next one I have here is the temporary occupancy agreement for the seller after closing. We have added here on line 10 and 11 that this agreement is not intended to be used for occupancy more than 60 days.
Yeah. We're not trying to. But the committee chose to go the direction that really most of these are going to be the buyer's responsibility. They do own the home. They will have homeowners insurance on the home. And so it will be their responsibility. However, the seller remains responsible for their own belongings and then also any damage that they caused.
The words normal wear and tear were not enough
Yeah.
to really interpret in situations where something went out that was normal wear and tear. But buyers and sellers could not agree on to whose responsibility it was to make sometimes rather sizable repair payments, to which the next part addresses as well. We are reiterating the home protection plan paragraph from the listing agreement and the purchase and sale agreement in the 627 here, the temporary occupancy agreement for the seller. I think it's very important. I'm hoping everybody agrees that's a good idea. If they have not already considered a home protection plan, this would save the day in most of the situations that were brought to us. So.
Right, and so it's just kind of, and maybe the buyer's mentality on that has changed once they've agreed to let the seller stay there. You know, that may happen mid-transaction. And so just kind of, like Stephen said, reiterating and giving them this opportunity to make it a part of any agreement.
Those are all the changes for the 627.
Yeah. So now we'll look at 633, which is just an addendum form. This is a pretty simple change. Just remove the term binding agreement and replace it with offer date. I think that was an overlook there. And so as I hope everyone on this call knows, an addendum is to be used prior to an executed agreement. So you wouldn't have a binding agreement date. You would attach it to an offer. Just want to make that clear. We do have a hand raised, and I doubt it's about this addendum form. But Worth, do you have a question? Can't hear you. All right.
Okay.
Okay, there you are.
I think I'm here. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
So I guess my question was on the temporary occupancy agreement. You know, especially in Memphis in the spring and summer when things are growing and there's yard to maintain weekly almost. So I think the line or the paragraph a couple down from there where it says the seller agrees to transfer the property in or like a better condition than the closing date probably answers my question. But just to clarify, the repairs and maintenance section that's been added sort of focuses more on repairs, but the seller certainly is still responsible to maintain the property, you know, landscape, etc., as it was on the binding agreement date. Correct?
Yeah, the possession transfer inspection language is still there, including normal wear and tear.
Yeah, I think that we need to go back and look at that. No, I think to your question, yes, like things that are not necessarily repairs, but maintenance are the seller's responsibility. We were really trying to address sort of the bigger repairs, like if the water heater does bust or, you know, if there's a water leak, what happens there, and not really like, did you scuff up the walls kind of thing. Like, so yes, the seller would still be responsible for maintaining the home as they received it at closing. But any large repairs.
Yeah. And you raise a good point. I mean, if it's a large yard, and like you say, in the spring, and it's growing, is the seller still going to be mowing the yard? Is the yard going to be mowed when the buyer comes to get it 50 days later? That's important, especially if you've got several acres to mow. That's very expensive. Thank you for that.
Great. Thank you all.
All right, and we had the addendum. The 656 notification form. Everybody uses this form. You got to have it every time.
That's right. Okay, so here you'll see a lot of just cleanup there, and then if you go down to line 134, it's the same thing we talked about in the disclaimer notice. We're just saying that It's just unilateral notification, so no one's acknowledging receipt of it. The notifying party is signing it there.
Unilateral notification. All right.
And then
And we've made it all the way to the 707.
I know.
Additional contract language. Here are your some special stipulations. The first right of refusal, addendum, right to continue to market property, is a separate form. There's no need to include anything other than that form or form number on the counteroffer or on the offer itself to include that that form. So this was removed. There's no need to have a special stipulation inserted to have that that document. Most of this looks like it's just cleaning up.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that was really the only substantive change on this form. I guess we would go to line 13 to 14, but again, that's really just cleaning
Well,
up.
that was the person it was written in. This was written
Yeah.
previously as kind of instructions, here, do this, and now it's more like all the other clauses are, something that you can copy and paste into your amendment, offer,
Well,
counteroffer.
And you would, just doesn't really sound so great. Okay, there's a hand raised. Candy?
I hear you and why you did that, but so many people are not aware of that other form and they don't know it. Just saying, it would be nice to say buyer's first right of refusal, right, C form, and put the number, just because I just don't think people realize all the forms that they have at their disposal, and any help for that would be.
I agree with you, and
Just my 2 cents.
I totally agree with you, and I also wish more practitioners knew about this form, the 707. I'm constantly giving copies to people.
I tout it all the time, but
Good.
anyway. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
No,
why you're
not
out
at
there.
all. That's good. Thank
That's
you.
why you're out there, Bobby, to let people know about these forms.
Mm-hmm. So we didn't have any other than housekeeping on that.
Yeah, and then, let's see. Where are we now? RF 712.
712, which is the importance of inspections and property survey.
Okay, and then I think Christy has her hand raised. Christy, if you want to ask your question. All these questions are fun, which is so great. But also remember that we're just kind of trying to talk about changes, and if you have any other questions, send them to the hotline.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Gotcha.
Okay, regarding the right to continue to market. So let's say the seller is countering and they want to add that addendum where they can continue to market. So would they mention on the counter then, see attached, it's not going to be a separate form all by itself, but it should be included somewhere on the contract if they're still in the negotiation stage?
Yeah, and you don't have to put C attached necessarily, just send them together, because the addendum or the amendment, whichever stage you're in, will reference the contract it's attaching to. And so by reference, that comes in. I mean, it doesn't hurt. There's nothing wrong with saying that, because it is being attached.
But it's not so much an amendment, but let's say the contract itself is still being negotiated. So you're still in a counter stage.
Yeah, and so that's an addendum. And I don't think it hurts anything, like I said, to put C attached.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just reference the 623.
Yeah.
C attached
Okay.
RF 623. I totally agree with you on
Yeah.
that one.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay. Any more questions before we move on to the
712.
VAFHA?
It's the 712 with the importance of inspections and property survey. Due to our discussions with the VAFHA, wood destroying insect inspections, we thought it would be a good point to add that to the items on here to inform a buyer on this subject, so that if you're not required to have one, you may still wish to purchase a wood-destroying insect infestation inspection.
And this form is for, like, a buyer's agent would provide that to their buyer. It's informational to the buyer. It kind of highlights these things, really relieves some liability for you. You can have your buyer sign the form, and you do not have to send this form to the seller or the seller's agent. I mean, because it's going to be a form that a buyer will fill out at the beginning of your relationship. And so it would make no sense to send it then to 17 different sellers or seller's agents. This is for your purposes and also for the buyer's informational purposes.
Yeah. Why it's very important to consider all of these things. Whether you choose to do them or not is your choice, but we want to make sure we inform you. And again, removing that this is a unilateral form, so there's no need to have line 93 there. It's a good form.
And it looks like Susan may have spotted something that we need to go back and review based on a change. And that's why I think that these forums are so helpful when we do them, is sometimes, like, you know, you all already saw when we're looking at that one, we're like, oh, that's not formatted correctly.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever served on the forms committee, you kind of know how it operates, and we have these meetings and you make these changes, but it's not always like having this and giving the holistic view really helps when we get other people's perspectives on it. All right, was that all our changes?
That's everything that I have here in the packet.
Okay. Are there any more questions on the changes from this year? And while that question comes in, I will say Stephen's rolling off as chair, but he is one of the most knowledgeable people about forms I've ever met.
Thank you, Addison, and thank
He's
you
like-
to Ron and Todd we have here in the wings as well, and all the members, again, of the committee. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve on this committee for the past several years, so I'm going to take a well-deserved break for a little while, but I may be back.
No, he'll still be citing forms in his office, like, this is RF 623. So he did a great job, and the whole committee did a great job, and I think we had a really good year.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another question there?
I think it was a positive comment.
Oh, thank you all. We really appreciate it. Well, all right, guys. Thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.